Okay.
Dana, welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thanks for being on. Thank you for being on. We were just saying how cold it is in London, and it's nothing compared to how cold it gets in Canada. So I won't complain about a -1 when you guys experience highs as -40.
Yeah, where I used to live, it would get that cold. I mean, then I couldn't take it anymore. I moved to the West
Yeah,
Coast, but yeah, it's
I think
where
I
the
would just
office is in
freeze.
Edmonton. It can get pretty cold. Yeah.
I think I would just freeze. Oh,
hmm
it's so cold. But yeah, not
It
as cold
builds
as minus
character.
40. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one way of putting it. I haven't gotten used
Yeah.
to the cold at all. I don't think I could ever get used to it. It's too much for me. I see people on TikTok
hmm
doing ice baths, and that is
hmm
something apparently it's supposed to be very good for you, but I don't think,
Sure.
not for
No, I'm
me.
not doing that either. No.
No.
No, no, thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. I came
hmm
across you on LinkedIn. Well, I've known of you for a long time. I remember the post that you carried out on Moz around utilizing data. It was a Whiteboard Friday, and I thought you'd be a
hmm
very interesting person to speak with. I want to go through 5 topics. So this series I'm
Okay.
calling Working with SEOs. And it's essentially speaking with professionals about their experience working with SEOs. And in this case, I want to focus it on client-side SEOs. I have 5 topics I want to go through. Implementing recommendations. That is a very key area that I've that I'm dedicating pretty much the entire podcast about. So I want to get your thoughts on a couple of topics on that. Reporting. I know you have
hmm
an amazing data-led mindset. So I want to get your thoughts on a couple of data-related questions. Managing SEO,
hmm
AI tools, of course. We have to speak on
Of
AI,
course.
and and we'll end off with the year ahead for you. So
Okay.
to begin with, when it comes to implementing SEO recommendations, there is
hmm
often a gap between when an SEO who's client side receives the recommendations or a strategy and
hmm
when that recommendation is actually implemented. And there is the client side SEO spends all this time essentially working or battling in some cases to have recommendations implemented. Do you
hmm
find that you have SEOs that you work with that find it a struggle to implement things from a client side point of view?
Oh, yeah, honestly, all the time. I would say that the exception is internals who can actually get stuff done as opposed to the rule. I think that the
Yeah.
biggest thing is really getting an understanding when we start working with a new in-house team of how past interactions have gone when it comes to getting stuff implemented. What are roadblocks that have been in your way? And something else that we
Mm,
also ask is, what kinds of questions are you asked when it comes to performance? For your own, for example, if you have specific indicators linked to your job performance or bonuses, what are those? Because it also tells us a little bit about what the culture is like at the company and, where the
right.
priorities lie. Because that
Hmm.
can also help us figure out what's important. And the other thing too, I think from an agency perspective, a lot of times too, these SEOs, they know what they're doing in a lot of cases. Sometimes they're just new or inexperienced. They don't necessarily know, and that's why they've hired you. But in a lot of cases, these SEOs are experienced and they've been trying to get these changes done for a while. And then now they've hired some agency who's come in and said exactly the same thing that they've said for years. Now all of a sudden it's like, well, why did you pay them when I was telling you this? And sometimes, honestly, like our job as consultants is to come in and say the things that the internal SEO has been saying, but because they paid us for it, now all of a sudden, it's a real thing and can get prioritized. So I think
Hmm.
establishing that kind of like wink, wink, we know that this is why we're here and we're all in this together, I think can really create a good working relationship with other SEOs. So it's not seen as an adversarial, like we're here to take your job. It's more, we're here to help you be able to do your job because maybe you've been
Mm.
had roadblocks in your way or whatever it might be. So I think establishing that level playing field and making sure, you understand everyone's here to work together is really important in that early stages of a relationship, especially if that SEO is not the reason you got hired. Maybe it's the CMO who came in and they hired the agency and now they're like, oh, and here's this SEO you'll be working with. Good luck. So the other thing too that we have in our contract specifically is we have a clause called mystery voices. And that means that if you are going to introduce someone new to the project halfway through the project, there will be a charge for that and time and everything else. And basically, everybody's going to be involved has to be there from the beginning. And we know that, people change jobs and everything, but it's the idea that these are the roles of the people who are going to be involved. And that really helps people take a moment before they sign that contract and think, who is everyone who's actually going to be involved in this project? And then it can help, broaden the number of people who would come to those initial meetings or have those initial discussions or be involved in when we discuss the goals of the project. And that can be really, really helpful to do that. So I'd recommend implementing something like that if you don't have something already, just to make sure that everyone's involved from the beginning. And then, in terms of implementation, just find out why this stuff didn't get implemented before. And also, how you present recommendations really makes a difference too. So Arij Abu Ali, who I'm sure you know from the UK SEO scene, she had a fantastic post on implementing technical recommendations and how to present them. And I strongly recommend that SEOs check that out if they haven't already. So I think that agencies will be like, I'm just going to run an audit and, Ahrefs or SEMrush or whatever it might be. And then that's not helping anybody. You really have to think about what's conceivable and don't drop a 100-page audit on some poor SEO's doorstep and expect them to sort through it and figure out what's going to get done, because then nothing's going to get done.
Yeah, I always find there's a fine balance that needs to be had between providing detailed recommendations and having something that can be implemented as soon as possible. Because otherwise there is this gap where nothing is implemented and the business gets frustrated with the SEO in-house saying, why aren't you performing? Why isn't SEO performing? But the SEO is spending all of this time trying to get people aligned. Sometimes going as much as begging heads of departments to help them with the operations that they essentially need. And a lot of the times it's nice to have a 100-page document detailing the strategy, but how realistic is it to implement something like that? It's unlikely. It might be great for,
not gonna happen.
It might be great for providing information, but all of that I've always found it to be very wasteful as far as time is concerned.
Yeah, and I think too, sometimes from an agency perspective, people think, well, I have to give this 100-page document, or people might be like, what are we hiring these people for? Why are they paying them so much? When they just sent us an email of these 6 things that we have to change, where's the value there, right? Yeah. So I think that there's also, sometimes people want that big document because they think, well, I'm being paid by the page, obviously, which is not the case. It's not actually how we get paid. We're not writing novels here. I mean, you shouldn't be. But the other thing too is really trying to break it up. So as you find things, because as you do a technical audit, if you're doing a really in-depth technical audit, it is something where you'll go through it and you'll see some things that are like, that's odd, I'm going to look into that more. And then you'll see some things that are red flags right away. I can think of a really fantastic example from a client who didn't have an in-house SEO. Actually, we were working directly with the developers, and they had been using rel canonical tags to essentially try to shape the pages that they thought Google should index, which is not how that's supposed to be used. And so we just explained, this is how rel canonicals are supposed to be used. Why don't you take these 10 pages and change these rel canonicals to be what they're actually supposed to be, and then no index these other pages that you don't actually want to be indexed, instead of using rel canonicals to push traffic over. And it was a bit of a mess. But we said, just change these 10 pages, which were relatively high traffic, but not their most high traffic, and just let's see what happens. And then, within a couple weeks, it fixed itself and traffic increased, and, Google was understanding what the site wanted to do. And because we had that small proof, and because we only asked them to do one thing, then it was easy for the team to say, you know what, can you go back in, and now you've got these other 600 pages that you need to fix. Go back in and do that. And then while they were working on the 600 pages, then we dug back in and looked at the other stuff that we could improve. So part of it might be just coming back with something that you see right away. Don't wait for the entire audit to be complete and you have a whole song and dance presentation, everything else. Just be like, hey, I found this thing. It's actually a big deal. Why don't we focus on fixing this first? go ahead and fix that. And then I'll keep working on the technical audit while we see if the impacts of that come out. Because as we know, sometimes things, right, like your site is no indexed. Let's fix that. Oh, hey, it worked right away. That's a pretty rare situation where you can just like check a box and then the next day traffic increases, right? Like this isn't PPC. We can't just pay for things to happen right away. So because of that lag, sometimes it's good to sort of have recommendations that are staged over time. And if you find stuff that's urgent, like communicate it like it's urgent. Don't bury it in a report, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely agree. What should a client-side SEO be doing to get the business to support them better? Let's say business leadership. I'll actually ask the same question for heads of departments, but let's start with business leadership. What should a client-side SEO be doing to help to influence business leadership to support them more?
Yeah, I think SEOs do a really bad job of communicating the value that they bring to an organization. And this has been something that's been going on for years. I did a talk, actually it's on YouTube, from MozCon in 2013, so 9 years ago now. I think it's 2013, called Prove Your Value. It's about making sure that we have good. And honestly, that presentation was really interesting because not a lot of people have been necessarily talking about that aspect of SEOs at the time. And one of the things that I said in just a throwaway part of the presentation was, and don't report on rankings. And afterwards, people are like, what? You don't report on rankings? What? And that became like a major theme that came out of the presentation. Like, don't report on rankings because rankings don't make you money. And certainly, I mean, some places, yeah, they're obsessed about rankings because at some point, some SEO consultant came in and was obsessed with rankings, and now they've, changed that conversation. So in that case, you're going to have a bit of an uphill drive to try to turn that around. But I think SEOs in general do a very bad job of communicating how changes will impact business goals. So, for example, if you say things like, hey, our core web vital scores are really bad, like, what does that mean? Oh, that means you're less likely to rank. Well, what would happen if we did this, right? So instead it's, hey, there's a score that Google gives to websites based on how good they are for mobile rankings. You don't need to say core web vitals unless they're super into it. And then say, you know what? Our competitors, because you can evaluate your competitors' core web vital scores as well. Anyone can see how websites are loading. You can use a tool called Crux, and it's a Google Data Studio report that you can build, and it's free, and it will give you the data that Google has on any domain, especially if you have larger websites. It's great, but you can say, here's our scores, and here's your most annoying competitor scores, and here's this upstart company scores, and you can see why we're failing because these two are better than us. And so that means that we need to focus on this, this, and this, right? And have some like concrete reasons why. What is the business impact? And then say, if we do this, then we'll make sure that we're beating these two. And, we have seen in other examples, and this is where you go to case studies and other sites, when companies have improved this, they've increased their rankings by this amount, which results in X amount of business. You might even say increased rankings, just say resulted in X amount of organic traffic. And again, there are like organic traffic prediction tools out there that you can use as well. And say, we know, for example, right now that you get, say, 10,000 visitors a month from organic. They convert at a 10% rate. That means we get X number of leads, right? And then that percentage of them convert, or organic converts at a higher rate than non-organic sources. So therefore, we would get X number of more leads in if we increase the traffic by this amount, right? So that's the way you build that case, not, hey, our core web vital scores are bad. Like, who cares? Well, you care, but no one else cares, right? It's getting out of that nerdery. And I think the other thing that SEOs do a lot of is we like to present data in tables. Tables are not an exciting visual medium. I know we're all like super Excel nerds and everything else, but sometimes you just need to have like a bar chart or literally anything else other than a table. And that's, people like to see visuals of traffic going up and to the right. And if it isn't going up and to the right, like you can explain why, but certainly, don't always present stuff in tables. If I say to an SEO, hey, can you make me a report on, traffic coming to the website? The first thing that they're going to do is present something where it's, channels, traffic by channel in a table format. Like, no, that's not it. Like, where's the over time context? Is there, seasonal traffic that we need to be thinking about? What is the context for this data? And I think that could be really missing as well.
Yeah, totally agree. It's the storytelling is a big part that's missing for SEOs. Yeah. And I think that also lends itself to us improving our soft skills, especially to business leadership, because the way we communicate with SEOs is fine. But to business leadership, it's a different thing, especially when business leadership doesn't have an SEO background. I see the frustration within business leadership, especially when an SEO is explaining something and it's either too detailed or it's not being explained in the right way to be received. So it leaves them very frustrated and not wanting to work with SEOs. It doesn't
Or they think that SEO is just like, it's not real, or,
Yeah.
And it's entirely possible as well. You really need to think about the legacy of SEO for that business leader as well. Have they, one of the questions we asked is, have you worked, actually, this is one of the questions we ask leads even before they sign up. Have you worked with other marketing agencies in the past? What has your experience been like with them? Because we want to know, what baggage are you bringing to this relationship? And, a lot of what we get actually is, yes, we work with agencies. We felt like we were telling them what to do as opposed to them telling us what we should be doing. I would say that's probably the most common response that we get. And I think that that's where the business leader doesn't want to hire an agency to do stuff that they have to think of. They want to be presented with ideas on what can be done. And so I think that that's a really good question from an agency perspective to ask as early in the process as possible, so you can find out, what kind of client is this person going to be, and what sorts of, baggage and everything else that I'm going to have to work through or, work against in my relationship with them. And then, from the SEO's perspective, what has this past relationship, what kind of position has it put the in-house SEOs and the rest of the marketing team in, because leadership has had this bad experience in the past?
Have you found that there's been a rise in explaining SEO, spreading the awareness of SEOs to businesses, both from a operational point of view as well as a business leadership point of view? So I'm thinking of things like workshops, training, those sort of things.
Yeah, I think so. I think that there's less of it now, or I'm just not hearing about it as much as there used to be. I think there was a real explosion in it maybe like 10 years ago, and everybody wanted to learn about it, and everyone's like, no, I know what's going on. But the downside of that is that you all learned 10 years ago and things have changed. So, we definitely get a lot of people who are like, oh, I thought that this was like this, like not for a while, So the other part of it too is really updating, finding out what people know and then updating that information. And part of it too is explaining, things like AI, for example, right? Like AI is so hot right now in the SEO world, and maybe we're a little too excited about it. But at the same time, if a client comes to you and says, hey, can't I just, AI write all these posts? Why can't I do that? You should have a good answer other than, it seems wrong. Or, let's totally do it. Not realizing the potential risks you'd be opening yourself up to. And I think, for example, for things like, there's some things when clients say, I don't care about GDPR, I'm going to track these people anyway. Like, okay, well, you're going to find a lot of money. So just FYI. Or if a client says, I am not sure if we should do this or not, part of, again, your job as an agency is to keep up on this stuff and present to the client the risks and potential rewards of choices that they're going to make. Because there's never any necessarily clear-cut decisions in SEO. Sometimes there's some really easy stuff like that rel canonical example that I had, which, turned out really well for the client. That was great. But rarely do you get such a clear-cut example of change this and this will happen. Sometimes it's more, well, I understand that your CMS only allows for this. So I know we would rather do this, but we can't without a serious website, investment. And I don't know if the cost benefit is there. So in the meantime, let's do this instead. Those are the kinds of, gray areas that you can get drawn into. And in that case, it's really important to present the pros and cons. And, what if we don't do anything? What if we do half of this? What if we do all of this? And really, work through those scenarios as well with the client so that they have a good understanding of what you're presenting and why, and what will happen if you don't do anything as well.
Yeah, I'm finding that is an area that some agencies are starting to report on. So what is the cost of us not doing anything? I'm seeing that to be something that's rising within the industry, and I think that's another area that business leadership will definitely want to explore. Now, if we move on to reporting, you mentioned keywords earlier. Indicating not to report on keywords. Now, I've been saying for a very, very long time that one, keyword ranking is a vanity metric, and two, better than reporting on keywords is focusing on pages, because that will give you it will give you a better outlook on how SEO is performing. And also it will have SEO working better with other departments, because if everyone's looking at pages, it's almost like the business is looking at the assets that matter. And if keywords are going to be reported on, it should be keywords within pages. So the top view should be pages and then keywords, if that's reported on. What's your take on keywords?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that's a great way to do it. And that's something that we do in our reports is we'll blend together Google Analytics data with Search Console data based on the page as the primary key. Because, we obviously can't report on keywords on a page basis. We have not provided for years and years now. So this is what we do instead. But I think part of it too is also keywords are useful to help a client understand if a page is ranking for the right things. And because, when I first started in this career, I've been working in this field for 23 years now. When I first started in 2000, I would say the first 7 to 10 years of my career was convincing businesses to get a website. I originally started out as a website designer and then moved entirely into SEO. And then, now it's these clients who've had these websites for 10, 20 years, and they have they're on their 4th, 5th, 6th website project through the life of their business. And now, more content is not always the answer, is what we say a lot of the times to clients and SEOs. Like, I understand that you think you need to publish 3 times a week. Let's slow on down here, because one of the issues that you probably have is you probably have keywords that are split between multiple pages because you have multiple pages talking about these topics. And so I think keywords are useful from that perspective to understand, here's your 6 critical keywords that we're going to focus on these ones first. And here's the, 1,800 pages that are ranking for these 6 keywords. No wonder Google isn't returning anything. They don't know what to return. And, really explaining again to leadership that, Google is kind of not a very bright computer sometimes, and you need to make sure that instructions are clear. And by having all these different pages that rank for all these different keywords, or you're trying to rank for different keywords, none of them are going to rank because Google's like, I'm so confused, I give up, and then leave. So think of it like an angry toddler. And so I think that really helps to explain, this is why you have to be so clear and explain stuff in a way that Google wants you to explain it to them. And I think that's where a lot of the times I think that now as SEOs, content publishing is really less of a focus and more content auditing and fixing and consolidating and removing and editing and updating. I think that's the important thing. And so that's why, this obsession with AI, while I think it has some great uses, especially for things like, how do I get started with this? It's funny. I do, in addition to my work at Kickpoint, I do a weekly column on CBC Edmonton AM, radio station in Edmonton. And I just talked about ChatGPT again this morning and how students are using it for AI to help write essays and stuff. And the same thing too is happening with SEOs. But I think what's missing from the ChatGPT conversation is the idea that, you can say, I've told it, for example, write a positive review for a moving company in Texas, because I'd be curious to see what kinds of things it would write. And it tells you the different words that it feels would be most important, the order of the words that comes back. And you're not going to copy and paste that. But the problem is that if the AI is wrong in the things that it comes back with, you publish that, and now the AI is going to scrape that and then think, oh, this is important. And then you create this positive feedback loop of crap, right? So it's really important to really have that. You can't just, go ahead and publish it. But something else you can do with AI as well is give it a piece of content and say, hey, how would you improve this? That is also another use of that particular product. And I think that when you're dealing with blog posts that were written 7, 10 years ago, maybe they need a bit of an update, what are the advances in this field or whatever it might be, then at least you're working with what's already there, but then trying to improve it and consolidate it and make sure you're presenting to Google that united front. And, sprinkle in a little bit of AI when it makes sense for figuring out how to improve things or update things, but definitely don't ask ChatGPT to write you a blog post and then publish it without checking it, because that would be, that would be very bad.
No. That would be bad for business, good for SEOs, consultants.
Well, just look at what happened with, was it Bankrate? I think they had a whole bunch of AI-generated content, and a lot of it was bad. And I mean, for something like Bankrate, that's absolutely a your money or your life kind of website. Yeah. So it's dangerous in some cases.
Very, yeah, absolutely. I saw on your website, you say something quite interesting. Your job is insights, not data. What does this mean? Aren't they the same thing?
Yeah, I would say that data. So when we present reports to clients or create dashboards for them or whatever it might be, anyone can open up Google Analytics and see how much data is coming in. But the question is, what does that mean? Right? So the idea is that you want to have this automatically generated dashboard or report or whatever, words you're going to use to describe it or whatever is going to be set up. And the data is there, but the data is not the end goal, right? The value that you bring as an agency, as a consultant, as an in-house person is taking that data and explaining the context of it for people who do not live in this world. And so again, this is taking it and saying, we see an increase in this particular page, but I'm not seeing an associated increase in conversion rate. Well, that's because, looking now at the keyword data, we can see that you're ranking more for this kind of keyword, which is not something this page shouldn't be ranking for this keyword. So let's create another piece of content that will get these keywords over to this other page instead, which is purpose built for that intent. And then that will be more likely to convert, for example, right? That's the insight that you bring. And just looking at the data, you'd be like, oh, more traffic, not more conversions. That's too bad. And then the conversation would just end right there, right? And people would be like, SEO traffic doesn't work. And so that's where the insight really comes in to say, actually, this is what the issue is. And really it's, your day should not be spent like grabbing screenshots and copying and pasting and exporting CSVs and importing them into an Excel sheet or whatever it might be. It's, there's so many automated tools now to do this stuff. There's obviously we use Looker Studio, formerly Google Data Studio, quite a bit. There's tons of tools out there to do it. Let the tools do the data gathering. Then your time should be spent looking at the data and saying, what does this say to me? And how can I communicate, what we should do based on this data? Or the alternate is, here's how we've been doing. Are we going to hit our goals? Yes, no. If it's no, what do we need to do to change course? If it's yes, what have we been doing that's been working that we should keep doing? So again, that's the context, the insights that you should bring to the data instead of just presenting it and be like, ta-da, here's data. It's not what you're getting paid for.
Okay. So a client-side SEO might be thinking, okay, all of this sounds great, right? But my CMO, my CMO is stuck on keywords, rankings, and links. That's all the CMO cares about. Trying to get the CMO to get away from rankings will be a monumental task. What are the how would you approach that conversation with a CMO?
I would say maybe there's lots of jobs out there for SEOs right now. I think too, like part of it is don't stay somewhere where you're having a bad time as well. Like I know there's lots of layoffs in the tech world right now, but those layoffs are not happening in the SEO world. There has never been more of a demand, I think, for SEO and PPC people as well. Like it is a job hunter's market right now. So if you're working somewhere and this is happening, like if you can, I understand that that's, a bit of privilege and certainly not everyone has the wherewithal to pick up and move, especially say if you're in the States and your healthcare is tied to your job. And so you can't move for certain reasons. Like, that part sucks. But if you can, get another job. If you're stuck in that job, for many different reasons and you can't move, then I think the question is like, what can I do to present to the CMO what they want, but also start to sprinkle in the stuff that I want them to understand? So don't be like, well, no, I'm not going to give you this, or I'm only going to give you this. I'm going to give you this. And then I'm also going to explain this. Right. And I think that that's just a long process to educate people, and just start explaining stuff, the way you want to explain it. And the other thing too about rankings too is often even, getting them, you and that other person in the room, you Google the same thing at the same time, you get two different sets of results, right? That can be a really good way to illustrate that rankings aren't necessarily fixed. They're more of a moment in time and they're good for trends, not absolutes. And that's a theme as well that I find myself talking about and people on our team talking about with clients is the idea, even like analytics, right? It's not an absolute, it's a trend. And telling clients, for example, 30% of people in the United States have an ad blocker installed. So we're only seeing maybe 70% of the traffic, maybe less, maybe more, but only 70% of your website traffic overall is showing up in analytics. 50% of that 70% use Safari. Well, Safari has this intelligent tracking prevention, which means that people show up as new users every, X number of days, and we can see this in the results. And that's why, for example, this metric you're reporting on for years of new versus returning users is terrible, and we shouldn't report on it anymore, right? And in GA4, people are going to repeat the same mistakes with the first visit again. It's like, okay, so the only people we should actually count on for multi-touch attribution are Chrome users who don't use an ad blocker, which takes us down to, however much, like 25% of our overall GA traffic is actually trustable when it comes to multi-touch attribution. And if we look at that slice, then we can see that, SEO is more likely first touch, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But no one may have presented that data to them before in that way. And there's lots of charts out there. If you Google like market share of ad blockers in the country that you're in, there's lots of great sites out there that have this data already compiled. You can be like, look, it's, we're probably getting more traffic than we thought because of this. Because especially people will they'll say, oh, and in GA it said that there was, 50 conversions, but I see 60 in HubSpot. Why is this analytics crap? Like, well, if if they're using an ad blocker, they fill out a form. You can't hide from filling out a form, but you can hide from GA. So that's why that's showing up, right? And it's just, that's a great way to introduce that conversation, because no one has probably said anything to them before. And again, if they learned about this 10, 15 years ago, yeah, analytics worked a lot better before everyone had these pesky ad blockers and stuff, before we had these privacy tools and people cared about not sharing everything on the internet. What? I use an ad blocker too. So in that case, I think it's really important to be like, hey, look, things have changed and this is what's changed. And so we need to have this context when I give you this data so you understand the differences. I'll give you the data you've always used because it's important to have that time frame and like that long view of how things are doing, but I want to start to introduce this metric as well. And I've even been saying that to clients when it comes to GA4. There's some things like bounce rate, which I've always thought has been a horrible, horrible metric, and people didn't understand why it's so bad. Well, it's gone now in GA4. And while there is technically a bounce rate, it's like reverse engagement rate. Engagement rate is not measuring the same thing that bounce rate was. Engagement rate is by default 10 seconds on a page is the active tab, is visiting to pages on the site, or it's a conversion. So not at all related to bounce rate and how bounce rate was calculated poorly in Universal Analytics. So now you're going to have this new metric. And I tell people, like, start introducing it now to leadership, because if they have been relying on bounce rate, they're going to be real sad on August 1st, when you present the first GA4 only report and there's no bounce rate in there. So you have to start having that conversation now to make sure that people don't feel like they're getting whiplash when it comes to August and we're all presenting those first GA4 reports. So that's the kind of thing. It's just like, sprinkle it in now. Think ahead to what you're going to have to do and the kind of data you're going to have to present to get there, and get people familiar with that process instead of just coming in and being like, this is how we're doing stuff now, and then change everything. People don't like change.
Yeah, no, it takes time, doesn't it? And I find that with data, especially, there was a period where big data was was a thing, right? And I almost feel that's made some marketers quite lazy in terms of, or going to what you said, gathering insights from data. The data is not the end goal, as you indicated. Yep. It's the insight you get from it. So you actually have to have your marketing minds engaged. Otherwise, there's no point to it. I remember when keywords tool. Yeah, so go ahead.
No, I was just going to say too, and the other thing too is you should understand if your data is correct. Like people who've been reporting, I keep picking on bounce rate, but that's a good example. If you've been reporting on bounce rate for years, but you don't know how bounce rate is calculated, like that is a flaw in your data. Are you actually collecting what you think you're collecting? What are the missing gaps in your data? And I don't think people necessarily question data in that way. And they absolutely should present the gaps along with the analysis.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. Now, when it comes to managing SEO, if I were to ask you what clients should consider before hiring an SEO, what would you say?
I would say that you should probably have someone who's an SEO tell you the kinds of things that you can ask that will help you tell if this person actually knows what they're doing or not. Because, in our industry, basically you just need a laptop and a SEMrush account. Now you're an SEO. And, like everybody's new. Everybody starts at some point. But I think that there's also a lot of people out there who genuinely don't know what they're doing, and they don't know that they don't know, and they could be a little bit dangerous because of that. And then it makes the whole industry worse for the rest of us who do know what we're doing. So I think in those kinds of cases, ask your agency, ask another SEO that you know, what are the kinds of questions you can ask that will tell you if this person knows what they're doing when it comes to SEO. So for example, like explain the purpose of the rel canonical tag, or how is hreflang set up, like these more on the more technical side. Or, you can present specific questions to them. Like, we've got these 18 pages, take something from your real site. We've got these 18 pages that we need to rank, and they're all ranking for the same keyword. Like, what's the first thing that you would do? For example, like those are the kinds of questions to ask. And the other thing too is I think everybody has to start somewhere. And so if you do have in-house people who can train someone, also don't be afraid to do that too. It's not like there is a great SEO degree out there in university, right? A lot of people come out with marketing degrees. They might have taken a course on SEO in school. Yeah. Maybe they've learned a little bit on their own, but they don't necessarily know. Everybody's got to start somewhere. And so by having someone who understands the role of, is a good communicator, can look at data and start to glean trends from it, is really interested in SEO, you can train that person to become a great SEO. Yeah. It's entirely possible. And I think certainly should our education system be better about training SEOs in school? Sure. But also educational systems are slow to change, and SEO changes quite quickly. So again, I don't know if that's necessarily the best option for it. So something that we've been doing at Kickpoint is having summer internships. We take people who are relatively new out of school and then essentially train them to become, SEO or PPC or whatever. But in the beginning, they look at everything. They look at all the different stuff that we do, and then they decide from that, what are they most interested in out of this review. And so my business partner, Jen, and our co-director of strategy, Laura, are really responsible for that. And I think they've done an amazing job of bringing new people into the industry from that internship program.
Awesome. What do you think frustrates clients about SEO?
Where to begin? I think they want to know, like, when are things going to change? Like, if I do this, when am I going to see results? Right? That's the number one question. And we're always like, oh, it depends, which is the worst answer. Like what we say all the time, right? It's like, what's the weather going to be like today? If you ask an SEO, they say, oh, it depends. And I think we say it depends because we don't know. There's no guarantees, but you could say, instead of it depends, there's a 70% chance this is going to happen. There's a 30% chance this is going to happen. Just even if you're not sure, say some possible outcomes. So for example, when we do site migrations, so a client is moving from an old website to a new website, domain isn't changing, probably some URLs are changing, maybe they're changing CMSs, so a lot of URLs are changing. Setting the context can be, right away, we expect to see anywhere from 20 to 40% drop in your traffic. Then after 1 week, that traffic should be recovered. If it's not, then this is what we're going to do. And then if it is, this is what we're going to do. And then in 2 months, we expect to see a 10 or 20 or whatever % increase in traffic. And then if we don't, this is what we're going to do. And if we do, this is what we're going to do, right? And so really understanding that these are the things that I know could possibly happen, and these are the actions that I'm going to take based on those outcomes, so the client knows you have a plan. Because, the leadership or the client or whoever it might be doesn't want to worry about your job. They want to know that you're worrying about your job. And so by having a contingency plan and understanding the kinds of risks that could come up and what you're going to do about it, you're not running by the seat of your pants. And so because you have a plan, they will feel confident in you because they know that you've got a plan.
Yeah. Totally agree. And I think with the example you give with migrations, that's key, isn't it? Like ensuring there is a plan in place, even if you have an ABC scenario in place, and there's business actually, leadership.
There's a great blog post actually on Moz that one of our clients wrote. The client is named OnLogic, and so if you Google OnLogic Moz, I'm sure we can post this in the show notes. Our client actually went and wrote a case study about our work with them when they did a brand migration. So they didn't migrate the website, they just migrated the brand. When they first approached us, they wanted to migrate the website as well, change CMSs, and change the brand. and just other stuff like, whoa, and introduce new languages. I think too, they wanted to add new languages. Like most people
all in one.
It's just, whoa there. It's like, I get you're excited, but, and they were really like, why can't we do all this? And it was a matter of explaining, you only want to change so many things at once, and this is why. And again, like just explaining your reasons for it as opposed to saying no and just leaving it at that can be really important as well. And a migration is something, especially if you are in-house, you're only going to do this once every few years. It's not going to be a regular part of it. So it's almost like, how did I do this last time? What are the new things that have come up in the past years that I need to be thinking about, right? So really doing that research in advance and being able to show that, you've done your research, the possible things that could go wrong. Here's this great checklist that I found, and here's all the different stuff. This doesn't apply to us. This does. This is something we haven't thought about yet. Just really get that in there and make sure you're thinking about that stuff and you're showing that you're thinking about that stuff can be really important.
Yeah. Totally agree. Now, given where you think digital marketing is headed, what should SEOs be doing to prepare their clients for it?
Yeah, who can predict the future, honestly?
Yeah.
People would think about 5-year plans and then COVID happened and then like, why bother predicting the future? Maybe there'll be another pandemic. Right? I think it's completely changed how people think about that stuff. But I think if you look ahead to what's been happening, say, over the past year, AI is a bright, shiny new tool. And what happens when SEOs get new tools is we break them because we use them to spam. And then, and Google's already said, we're going to be looking for AI detected content. Can they detect it yet? There's some tools out there that can say, like, this was probably AI written. And if you're using AI in your content at all, you should probably be using those tools to see if you need to change stuff, like instead of publishing it wholesale, for sure. But I think that might be one of the things that's going to come in the future is there's going to be more of an emphasis from, there are other search engines out there, but Google's the big one. So from Google to say, this content is of poor quality, right? And a lot of their updates over the years have been about content quality. And I suspect that AI content will be the next big content quality issue. And then when it comes to other stuff, like I think GA4 is going to be a huge thing that, SEOs, like, I know you don't want to think about analytics, but guess what? It's happening. So if you're watching this and your, company or your agency or wherever you work doesn't have a GA4 migration plan, like clock's a ticking. You got less than 6 months now. So you got to get on that. Move to GA4 immediately. And then other stuff that's going to happen, like it's hard to tell, honestly, in this industry. I hate making predictions because I'm often wrong, but I would say that AI, there's going to be something that's going to come down about AI. Is Google good at detecting it? I think Google can talk a good game about the stuff that they can pick up on and they can't pick up on. But if that was actually the case, then we would see less spam in search results. And then thinking as well about what are consumers doing, not just, as SEOs, how are we interfacing with search engines? But if we think about, the end consumers who are Googling or whatever for this stuff, places like, TikTok, for example, are becoming a search engine. So what are you doing there? And the answer is not necessarily getting a TikTok account, but also thinking about what are alternate search engines that may make sense for our industry. Where is the audience hanging out? Is there a way that I can just circumvent search engines entirely? And I think as well with all the drama that's been happening at Twitter, people have thought more about, maybe we shouldn't rely so much on social networks. Maybe we should have a mailing list. Maybe we should capture email addresses. Like, yeah, you probably should. And then if Twitter goes away tomorrow, at least you'll have, another way to contact all these people. So really thinking about that, I think every time a social network closes shop, people are like, oh, I should think about our email list again. Like you should always be
switch the emails.
You should always be trying to collect those email addresses, right? And so really thinking about like, how is this piece of news going to impact our industry? So a site that, for my technology column, I have to be on top of this stuff all the time, but a site that I use quite a bit actually for this is called The Verge. And they're great with their tech reporting. And I find that what's useful is I really seeing the kinds of trends and the stories that are coming up and then thinking, oh, you know what, this is probably going to be something that's going to impact us. Just really trying to get that on your radar before it actually becomes a problem. There's also great email newsletters out there too. There's one TLDR, that I also pay attention to, which is helpful for, new stuff coming up in tech.
Yeah, I think AI is at this point a sure thing. The way Google, I think Google had this in mind to prepare for it, but I do think Bing and other social or other networks like TikTok, social media sites, have propelled them to respond quicker And I'm very curious to find out how they'll integrate AI within search. I think the obvious thing for them would be to buy out ChatGPT, for example,
Yeah.
and just incorporate that within their search. Alternatively, create their own. It's
Well, I think they have been
I
creating their own, and I think
yeah.
ChatGPT came out of the gate first. They're like, oh crap, what are we going to do now? Because it is a huge risk to them for sure in terms of how ChatGPT came so quickly out of the gate. And I think at first you're like, oh, this is just a fun toy, like the image search, the Wall-E that everyone was obsessed with, right? Or Dolly,
Yeah.
was that what it was called? Dolly. Yeah, and that didn't necessarily go to a lot of places, but the idea of creating images and everything else, it's the same idea with creating text. And I think Google is playing a little bit of a game of catch up right now, but they're going to get there. It'll happen. So just know that eventually, if you are putting all AI generated content out there, eventually it'll get caught. It's bound to happen.
I think this will be the biggest threat to Google since they dominated all their competitors, and I'll be very interested to find out how this will impact the way people search, i.e. the way people know how to search. And what are your thoughts on how this will influence people's navigation in search?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's already been a big change in navigation. Particularly, we see it in local SEO. People open maps and then do searches in maps. And as SEOs, we think, oh, we're just going to open up Google and I'm going to type in a search, right? That is not how a lot of people use the internet, and how we use the internet is not how normal people, as in non-SEOs, use the internet. I think it's really important too to ask, like your in-laws how they use the internet. Ask your friends who don't work in this field and don't know a lot about what you do. See how they search for stuff. And sometimes it might be frustrating. You're like, why are you doing that? You could do this instead. But I think it's always good to have a refresher of how people of all ages as well are using the internet. And really just trying to understand, be where they are. And if there's, for example, sites that they use all the time, and a tool like SparkToro, which is Rand Fishkin's new tool, is great for this, is maybe there's a podcast your audience listens to. Like, don't bother with SEO, just get yourself on this podcast, right? Like, those are the kinds of things that you can think about when you're, behind the eight ball. Maybe your competitors have completely dominated the search results for years. It's going to take you forever to break into that. Is there stuff that you can do in the meantime? So really thinking about where your audience already is instead of trying to capture that audience from elsewhere can be a more effective strategy.
Yeah. And I think this is why a lot of brands have moved to TikTok. Because I've also noticed their search functionality on TikTok, and I've been wondering, is this a big play to eat at Google's dominance? And I think it is, because
I don't know if they came out originally and thought that was going to be a big thing for Google, but that's how people started using it. They're like, oh, okay, well, I guess we'll just do this then. I mean, I think the threat to TikTok are the security and privacy, sort of scandals that are coming out of TikTok now, where they're, actually taking people's personal data and everything else. I don't have a TikTok account. I just read about it. But I think that is a threat to TikTok. Absolutely. So they're going to have to decide what to do about that. And then is there going to be another like TikTok-y type social network that's going to come out of that will end up beating them because they have better privacy rules or whatever it might be. So I think paying attention to that possible fragmentation of the social media landscape, with especially things like, people leaving Twitter for Mastodon, or if something else comes up that can capture the media's attention, because the media isn't moving from Mastodon, they're still on Twitter. So if someone can figure out how to get the media off of Twitter, that would become the next social network, because the media would talk about it all the time, right?
Yeah, Twitter's one that I've been reluctant. I'm technically on Twitter, but I'm not very active on it. I find that LinkedIn is probably the best social network for me. I'm old school. I'm from the days of MySpace. I would say that was the last social network where I was actually very, very active in. Ever since then, it's just been not my thing, not my cup of tea, as we would say.
Yeah, I never had a MySpace account because I think I'm too old for MySpace. When it was out, I was like, that's just for kids. So I've been doing this for a while now.
Now, Dana, looking at the year ahead, what are you looking forward to this year?
I mean, I would say the thing that I'm enjoying quite a bit, actually, and this is really not a lot to do with SEO, is as at Kickpoint, we moved to a 4-day work week. And I have worked 5 work days a week my entire working life since I graduated university in 1997. And yeah, at first I was like, I'm not sure, but I'm going to give it a shot, and I'm really enjoying it. So may I recommend 4-day work weeks? And it's also really great for the environment. It turns out less commuting, right? Less people driving around and whatnot. I'm finding that the week is a lot more focused, and there's a lot less like downtime because you're not exhausted and just trying to fill time, for sure. I think what's going to happen too is the good companies are going to recognize that these sorts of things like 4-day work weeks, not capping vacation. We have a minimum vacation as opposed to a maximum vacation, and really trying to be okay with remote work, that sort of thing. Like those are the kinds of companies that are going to end up attracting employees in the long term. And I think having a great team is really going to make a difference for these kinds of companies. It's not necessarily the best technology or having the right tools. It's having the right people in place who are actually motivated and excited to help that company succeed.
Interesting. I saw on online that Disney are actually trying to sway employees away from working from home.
Of course,
I pre-pandemic, I think I was more of an office person, but post-pandemic, I don't know how we ever did it.
No, it's just so much. My house. Like I moved. I'm not even in the same city where the office is anymore. I was always planning to move out to the West Coast. It just happened to happen during the pandemic, and I was worried about not having like an office outside of the house. But yeah, definitely, I'm very entrenched in my home office now. And I think a lot of people too. It's like, well, obviously for the past however long, like 2.5 years now at this point, 3 years.
Yeah.
We've been working from home, and it's been fine. So what has suddenly changed that you're forcing people to go back to the office? The answer is nothing. Nothing has changed. But I think that there is a certain level of management where their job is walking around and looking busy. And you can't look busy and not actually be busy when you're working from home. You can't, walk around and bug people or have pointless meetings or like Shopify just had a really aggressive, no more meetings unless these criteria are met type rule, and I think that that's a really important step for companies to take, is to think about like, what are we actually doing here? And that's a really hard thing for people to do. It's like when we say companies who don't set goals, they don't set goals because then you have to meet those goals. Right? You don't want to do this because then you actually have to do the thing, and that thing is hard, and people don't like doing hard things naturally. So that doesn't happen. And I think, are there stuff you're going to have to do to transition to a fully remote workforce? Yep. Does it suck that you're paying money on this office that no one is using? Also, yes. Is forcing people back to the office the answer? Probably not. I think there's more than one way to explore this. I'm not, however, working in a large multinational corporation. They obviously probably have different concerns. And so people do like working from the office, which is why we still have our office in Edmonton. We're always going to have our office in Edmonton. There are people who work from there. Is everybody there every day who's in Edmonton? No, definitely not. But, is it great to go back? I was back in December for a Christmas party. I'll be back in April for another team building event. Yeah, it's fun to go back and hang out with everybody for a couple of days. And then I come back to my home office and where I've got my headphones and my cats. And then I just focus on work and, do the Zoom calls now and again.
Yeah, I find that working from home by far is better for me now. I don't think I can ever go back to the office, slogging it out every single day. For me, it's the commute that's a big issue, because I calculated the amount of time I spent commuting, and it's I don't think it's something I can go back to at all.
No, definitely not. Like, my wife goes in 2 days a week, and her commute is a 45-minute one-way drive, so it's like 90 minutes spent in traffic.
Yeah.
Like, that's not great, but it works for the government. So that's what she does.
The 4-day week, change, is that a new change that you guys have, put in place? And also, is it something that's promoted in Canada? I know some countries, promote shorter work weeks.
Canada's really interesting because we have this kind of, America's right there and it's quite loud and noisy and we get a lot of American media. And so a lot of the things that we do are influenced by what's happening in the States. But there's also a little bit of, we're not Americans. We're not that crazy, And so I think that there is people wanting to have more of that, what would be considered to be like a European approach to work. And I think we are caught in the middle a little bit some ways. So I think part of it depends on management and what kind of management style that they wish to have. Do they want to be an American style company or European style company? Right. And with the 4-day work week, actually, when we were telling clients about it, we have a emergency email that clients can email, which will go to our cell phones in case there is actually a marketing emergency, of which there are rarely marketing emergencies, but it can happen. Not your website going down, call your hosting company, but like marketing emergencies in the past have been things like, our office is flooded. Please shut off our ads because we can't help anybody today. Great. That's a marketing emergency, that kind of thing. But I think what we've said to them is, no, we're not doing, 4 10-hour days or whatever it might be. It's the same number of hours we would normally work in a 5-day work week, but we're just working 4. And, it's just explaining that it's not a way to compress more work into less time. It's just saying, is this day actually important? And we were doing no meeting Fridays for over a year before this. So it did feel like it was, you can't just, go from like 5 days of meetings all the time to lopping a whole day off and then people will panic. I think if you do want to go in this direction, it has to be a transition. But I think part of it is something that we've always had at Kickpoint has been this idea of an actual work-life balance and not, that hashtag agency life where people are like sleeping under their desks and stuff. That's never been something that we've wanted to do. So this feels like a natural extension of that kind of philosophy.
Oh, thank God. Thank you. Please, if in a couple...
I have to say, like, I personally have very little to do with this. Like Jen and Laura have been so amazing at approaching the human side of, how we run the company. Like I'm a big nerd and I can keep on top of technology, but the human side, like that's all Jen and now Laura, who's been on our team for a few years now. And it's been great to have them think about that so I can think about the nerd stuff.
That's brilliant. That's music to my ears. In a couple of months, I would love to see a case study so I can show a number of people here in the UK. That would be great. Dana, thank you so much. Where can people find you online?
I would say LinkedIn is probably the place I'm most active. I've been publishing courses on LinkedIn Learning, so I spend a fair amount of time there. Technically, I'm still on Twitter, although I mostly just go on and retweet funny stuff. And definitely join the Kickpoint newsletter. So if you go to kickpoint.ca/newsletter, and there's also a sign up in the footer, it goes out every Friday. It has some fun stuff that's going on with us and also things that we find important in the lands of digital marketing and design and also cute animals. So I recommend signing up for that.
I'll be sure to have those links in the description. Thank you so much for your time, Dana, and we'll catch up again soon. Cheers. Hold on the line just for like a minute or two after I hit the stop button.